Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wharton Tech Talks. I'm Spandana.
And I'm Javier Torres.
And we're the co-hosts for Wharton Tech Talks. Today, we are joined by Will Grannis, the VP and CTO of Google Cloud. Prior to this, he was the founding CEO of Google Public Sector Cloud and the founder and managing director of the Office of the CTO at Google. Prior to joining Google, Will spent the last 2 decades as an entrepreneur, enterprise technology executive, and investor, building and scaling technical platforms that today power commerce, transportation, and the public sector. He also holds an MBA from Wharton.
Will, we're excited to have you. Personally, I'll be joining Google next year, so I'm glad I'm talking to you. Where are you calling us from?
Well, first, it's really a great honor and privilege to be with the both of you and to be a guest here on the August Wharton podcast here. So thanks for the invite. And I'm dialing in today from Austin, Texas.
Cool. We did some research on your background and you moved from the military to becoming an investor, and now you are an operator. So for our listeners, we would all like to know how you did these changes. What were the reasonings behind them?
Sure. Well, there are 2 threads that are probably consistent throughout my career. Number 1 is a desire to serve others, and 2 is an unbounded curiosity. So how did those play out? Well, when I was in high school, I really wanted to pursue a college degree that would not only give me a great education, but also give me a chance to serve others. And, West Point ended up being a great opportunity for that. So that's what started my career. And in the military, really a desire to protect and serve others. And while I was there, and while I was in the Army, I noticed a whole bunch of unmet needs in our military and how technology could make a difference. And that's really what spun me towards technology and pursuing a career in technology. And then just following my curiosity from there. My first job after that was at a small company building satellite telecommunications devices. And I knew nothing about telecommunications devices. So this is a true story. I went out and got Telecommunications for Dummies. I still have the book. And I learned how RF energy is created by signal processors and sent to space and back. And ever since then, just try to find interesting problems that had meaningful outcomes on the other end. And that's led me to becoming, an investor, an entrepreneur, starting my own company, working in scaled innovation companies ranging from aerospace and defense to IT and the internet, where I'm at now. And in every case, just really trying to honor that spirit of service and find ways to be helpful with technology. And then also, I'm just never satisfied in one area. So I'm constantly looking to expand my knowledge. And that was actually what led me to Wharton as well. I was a product person, I was an innovation person, and I wanted to go where all the finance and quants were. And I found out very early on that that was both a humbling experience, but also exactly what I needed when I showed up in Pennsylvania. And I realized that very early on, they say, okay, we've got poets and we've got quants. And, which one are you? And I was like, both. Kind of an indication of I've never really put much faith in or much credence in categories. I just really pursued my curiosity and interests. And even at Wharton, I put together kind of an unusual set of classes around, entrepreneurship, technology, corporate finance, high finance. I was just so curious. I wanted to learn it all. So that's what drives my career choices is service and curiosity.
Yeah. And I think when you mix the poet and the quant, you get to become more innovative, right? And that's why I think you have been enjoying your career in tech, which brought you to Google, where you have had an excited career. So can you tell us more about the roles you have had with Google?
Yeah, sure. And it's been an extension of the rest of my career. As I progressed, I've always wanted to do more. And one of the things I discovered about 8 or 9 years ago when I was considering making a change was scale is really something I was interested in. I wanted to help the most people I possibly could. Because if you think about it, going from small companies in your own company to larger companies and kind of certain segments, there's a chance to serve more and more people. So at Google, what I discovered was the opportunity to serve billions of people at the same time. And that was really eye-opening. I was the CTO of a public company. This was roughly 2013-ish, 2014. And I came across this technology for doing large-scale analytics by basically dragging and dropping tables of data onto a web interface. At the time, I didn't know what it was. It was just this really interesting capability. We call it BigQuery here at Google. But that was what really brought me to Google, was I saw the emergence of this technology that Google had been working on for itself, that it was about to externalize for the rest of the world. And I wanted to be part of taking capabilities that most enterprises and most companies and most organizations thought you had to go spend a bunch of money and to hire a bunch of people and spend a bunch of years to do things that now you could drag and drop. And I kind of saw a glimpse of the future. And so I wanted to be a part of building that future and externalizing the amazing capabilities and innovation at Google for customers around the world. And it just so happened at the time we were at Google, they were also building out their cloud business. You can think of Google Cloud as this place where Google technology is being externalized for our enterprise customers and partners. And so it was just really great timing too, because I had a bunch of enterprise background. I had spent a lot of time both on the technical side, but also on the business side, having started my own company, having been an investor. Having multiple, I guess, lenses and facets of experience really helped me jump in a very entrepreneurial environment in Google, where we were building out an entirely new business called Google Cloud.
That's phenomenal. And it looks like your experience is aligned with the opportunity. So just the right timing as well. So you've been focused on Google Cloud for, I think the last 2 roles that you've held there. What are some interesting trends that you're seeing in cloud computing today?
Sure. Well, first off, the journey within Google, and I think this is important to share with your listeners, is that it's nonlinear. And I think so much, when you hear about careers, and it's always easy to look back and say, here's the clear path to how I ended up where I am. And it always made sense. And I was able to forecast it 10 years ahead of time. And I had this plan and, you just followed those steps. And that's absolutely, at least in my case, definitely not true. The opening for building the CTO function at Google actually came as a result. So I joined Google. Not many people know this, but when I joined Google, my job description was very vague. And I was willing to jump into a very vague job description and try to work my way out of it. And what do I mean by that? It means when I showed up, I had a laptop. We were at a shared office space, and you're a technologist, you're a business person, we're trying to build cloud. We're not exactly sure how you're going to be useful. Go be useful. But we think, you've got something to offer. And that was harrowing. That was a very harrowing experience to show up at a company like that with so many smart people. And then they tell you, go be smart, and maybe you can stay, and maybe you can do something valuable. First, I think it's really important to, just pull the curtain back a little bit.
Yeah, of course.
There was no preordained, I didn't apply for a job that said, go build the CTO function at Google. It was actually an idea that we came up with and our senior leadership came up with as a result of experience with our customers. One thing at Google is we're very customer driven. We want to make sure that what we build and what we do is driven by the needs of markets and users. And so just even building the office of CTO and now, 8 years later being the CTO, those are all a result of me just wading into ambiguity and complexity. And it all started, I wrote a doc. I got a question one day about what we should do. I wrote a document, Google Doc. You can't write more than like a couple pages or no one will read it. So it was only 2 pages, and it laid out the framework for how this organization would work and what we would do and what we would focus on. And so you've already hit on one of the 2 primary things that we do. One thing that we do is we work with the top 200 customers and partners around the world on really complex first of implementations with cloud, because cloud can mean everything from selecting the computational shapes that these applications run on down in infrastructure and semiconductors and chips. And it can mean all the way up to software as a service and things that people interact with that are kind of no code, low code, and everything in between. So there are a lot of companies moving to the cloud. It's a very large market, $1 trillion+ market. And so there are a lot of people that need help. And that was our first mission, was help our top customers and partners achieve success in cloud. And the second was, what you alluded to, when you work with the top 200 customers around the world, ranging from India to Canada to the US to Germany, Italy, France, you see some really interesting patterns and shapes. And so our second mission in the team is also to make sure that Google is aware of these emergent patterns, these kind of faint signals, so that we can align our research and development and our roadmap, our product development roadmap, to meet them and synchronize the timing. Because having done this for a long time, by the time the signal is well known to everybody, it's almost too late because others have been building in advance.
Exactly.
So it takes time to harmonize operations, engineering, sales, and all the different functions. So if we can get a little bit of a head start, it's really powerful. And a couple of examples, you asked about things that we've seen. A couple of examples recently of topics that we've seen a little bit ahead of time and helped the organization codify an approach to Web3 and the shifting, for example, distributed ledger technology and taking transactions and putting them out into the open so that everybody can verify and validate transactions. Sustainability is something that we saw in the boardroom of large companies years ahead of SEC and others starting to talk about what rulemaking or KPIs needed to be in place for enterprises. Federated computation. So the classic example is one that's more of a consumer example. It says, your phone may not always be connected, but it should always be useful. And how do you make that happen? It's actually a very complex computer science problem, especially when you're doing machine learning or you're trying to make a smart device that has no connectivity back to the hive mind. That's a very difficult thing to do. And then like health assurance, making sure that everybody has access to great health outcomes regardless of their connectivity, their location. These are very complex patterns. But those are some of the things that we've enabled. We've spun out new product areas within Google as a result. We've put new technology into the world. We've built new businesses around them.
First of all, thank you for pulling back the curtain. And I think many of our listeners would appreciate, right now, given the position you're in, we just read the bio and it just looks like must have been a job description that Will applied to, right? And turns out you show up there and it's kind of a very tough situation where you kind of have to be useful and you're surrounded by really smart people. And I'm sure you added a ton of value, which is why you're where you are today.
I appreciate that assumption. My personal journey has been one of constantly wanting to be the lowest common denominator in the room. I like being kind of the underdog and the person who may not have all the knowledge, but is rapidly catching up and gaining because I'm also very curious. And learning rates are highest when you're in the deep end. When I was leaving the military, I knew nothing about business at all. The military doesn't think of dollars and cents. They think of mission capabilities. And, it's all just like cost. So I went to a small company and I thought there's no better way for me to learn, finance, accounting, sales, quality assurance, technology than to have to do them all on any given day. So quite often, another arc, and I think that's one of the reasons why here at Google and in the CTO organization, we still try to maintain that entrepreneurial curious spirit is because it allows us to be open-minded to things that we may not have thought. Everybody takes a mental frame into a situation. And when I came to Wharton, originally, I was mostly for finance. And then I found out about this entrepreneurial track that they had and strategic management major that they had. And I was able to take some classes and we built a technology called Carbon Counter. Now, this was in 2009. So, sustainability is hot now, but back then, the premise was TurboTax for carbon emissions. And that was something that I never would have, showing up at Wharton, I never would have thought that I would be taking classes like that and really bringing forward that entrepreneurial spirit. But that's kind of stuck with me. That desire to learn has paid off. I didn't show up and they said, hey, to Google, and they said, hey, you get to be the CTO of a really large business. It's like, no, I had to kind of learn and earn my way.
Of course. And the other thing that you mentioned was around how you get to see many of these signals way ahead of the market, right? And I think that's extremely exciting for many of our listeners. And one of the things I'm very curious about is what keeps you up at night now in terms of thinking about Google Cloud and what the capabilities are? What are some challenges you're seeing and what are you excited about really in the future?
There's a lot that keeps me up at night because unfortunately, when you see a broad swath of things and you really want to be helpful, you can never do all the things that you really want to do. And so you have to pick and choose. One of my sources of anxiety these days is, are we doing everything we possibly can to help the most people possible in the most efficient and effective way? Because there's so many things that we could do, and making choices is really hard, especially making choices of what not to do. And a lot of the time I spend as a leader of our technology org is we see something, we know it's important, but we actually just don't have the time or the attention and the resources to pursue everything. I mean, Google's a big company, but even we can't pursue everything. So we have to be very diligent about where we focus. And that's something I think about a lot. And that's where we also have our customers continue to guide us on wherever the kind of biggest signals are. That's where we're going to spend the majority of our time. The second is just the coming wave of some things that we've been talking about at Google since 2015, 2016, especially around AI and ML and how it's going to change everyday lives, and it already is. Even just over the last few weeks, thinking about the trade-off between putting capabilities into the hands of people that might be able to generate content or generate language or generate a response, but then also on the flip side, the responsibility and the safety concerns. And a classic example is capabilities that are very responsive and very easy to use, but are incorrect in their responses, could send people down very difficult paths or, distract from value add. And that is going to be one of these really big deals. We've been talking about responsible AI and frameworks for this for years at Google. We published, principles around this. And now we're starting to see how important that thinking and that action is. For those of you that are listening, you can't see, but we can see each other here. Spandana, Javier, and I could see each other. And I saw the smiles show up when I started mentioning the topic of AI, especially over the last couple of weeks. It's been on a lot of people's minds. I'm thinking a lot, and our team's thinking a lot of how can we marry the best of responsibility with also being very responsive to emergent needs around machine learning and AI.
Yeah, it's a great topic to discuss. We have been seeing in the news image is built from machine learning, also text. The other day, Spandana sent me a letter that this AI did for a kid, telling him that Santa Claus was not real, but saying with a lot of love. And I was like, wow, this is a great letter. But at the same time, you also need to be mindful that there are biases, right? And if we don't check what is going on and what the output is, then we might be making something that already exists even bigger, right? So
yeah, these are not small problems to solve, Javier, to your point. I mean, I think every year, we probably invest over 20 million people hours in AI research every year. And we've been at responsible AI since 2018, 2017 is a dedicated focus area within Google. And when you're trying to take 20 million people hours of research and apply responsibility frameworks to it, not just that, but now think about all the other companies that are investing as well. It takes a lot of time, and the frameworks and the principles and how this technology is deployed and moderated and the rest is probably the biggest topic in the market right now.
What is the guiding principle of Google when you think about responsible AI?
Well, we have a number of AI principles, and, without taking the entire conversation into the AI principles realm, you can think of it as we know that AI is going to be a key differentiator in products and services. You're seeing this already in everyday life, whether it's autocomplete of a search or it's within Gmail where, it'll help you kind of get over time. It learns the words that you use and will kind of autocomplete your sentences to Gboard that's on your phone and learns how you type and can give you better recommendations for autocomplete. So AI is already all around us in our everyday lives. And our principle is we want to make sure that all of our customers and users, whether that's enterprise or consumers, have the best technology that we can possibly provide, but also there's a level of trust and assurance and they feel very safe using products and services where our AI is playing a large part.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, this is such a tempting topic, right? Because you could talk about this for the next 45 minutes and keep going. But I think one of the other things that I was reading about is AI sounds very confident. Like Javier brought up that Santa letter that someone had tweeted about. And at some point, there's also many examples right now of how there's this entire answer that's completely out of AI. And it sounds really confident as like, this is it. However, the facts are completely wrong. So there's also that level of how do you make sure, and I'm sure that's also top of mind for you in terms of how can you make the answers not sound as confident given that they could be wrong. When we are talking, we can make those kind of nuances very clear. However, with the results we're seeing, that's not really the case.
Yeah, for sure. And this is also an extension of content assurance that exists already today in a variety of social media platforms, content platforms. Now it just has an AI lens that allows it, maybe the pace is picked up. And to your point, large language models that are trained on how people structure language will, by definition, be pretty adept at structuring responses and how people use language. So that overconfidence is certainly a thing. It'd be remiss though AI is certainly number one, I think, in terms of, you asked about horizons and things that we're thinking about and applying a lot of time to, but there are a lot of other areas in which the market is looking for solutions, and the other places that we're really focused on, I definitely want to make sure that, represent these. First is data, because machine learning and AI, they're almost like an extension of a much larger data engineering strategy. And so, especially here at Cloud, one of our primary missions is to help our customers differentiate themselves with amazing technology. And that usually starts on a data journey, enabling them to go faster, innovate faster, and really have a great data platform. Usually that requires a very robust infrastructure, right? So peeling back AI, it is composed of, many different things. And so data infrastructure, we want to make sure that we give customers the opportunity to innovate and to scale, whether that's in computation they own, whether it's in the cloud, it's at the edge, it's at these big data centers. And actually orchestrating all of that computation is really important to making machine learning useful, because that means we have to think about what's happening in the phone at the local, place where your phone connects to the ISP and the 5G, and then it connects back to a core, and then it goes back to a data center. That entire journey has to be orchestrated across very complex technical platforms. So we're spending a lot of time there, and that's an area where we get a lot of positive feedback about thinking through. It's not just about an algorithm or a web UI or like a big massive data center somewhere. I mean, we're serving billions of people every single day around the world. So we have to think about it in a pretty broad spectrum. Maybe one of the newer, most profound changes is how people work and operate. I have 2 daughters, and as they've gone through school, so my oldest is in college and my youngest is in high school, and the way they work, I was with my youngest on a soccer trip. She plays soccer. So I was out this last weekend being a soccer dad, and we're on the plane coming back, and she's doing homework, and the way she's doing it is fascinating to me. She had her tablet out with the homework assignment. She had a phone out, with kind of a chat going. And this is on an airplane, by the way. I was blown away. And then she has this like the real-time kind of collaboration, data sources, and much more like efficient, available, rather than like big books and flipping through and notebooks. And it's really hard to do. I couldn't help but think that collaboration in the way that people learn and the way they collaborate is also undergoing a dramatic shift. I remember the days when you'd actually have to make a paper copy of something and walk it over to somebody or mail it to somebody in like inter-office mail or the rest. And, now the next generation coming up is much higher expectation standards. So I think collaboration is also an area of high demand and high interest. And it tends to be an area where pretty well regarded. And then, security. Imagine a scenario where a capability like what we were just talking about in AI now is corruptible.
Right. Nightmare.
How quickly you could send people into some really bad places or send experiences into some really bad places. So security is going to be top of mind too. Look over the horizon, or actually right now. And that means everything from security and computation and in the platforms, but it also means assurance around applications. And as you were alluding to, some very advanced techniques around content or transactions or interactions among community. And you asked about differentiation. I'm a CTO, so you're going to get a long answer. I apologize to all your listeners if they needed more coffee halfway through this, but it's okay. We're almost done. And then the last bit here is sustainability. And this is another, if AI is powering this new set of experiences, one of the bigger demands that we see from customers, partners, is we need to do this in a responsible, sustainable way. Carbon emissions, energy, even behavioral. We have customers today who are training their analysts to write queries that are more efficient, and they're showing them the energy impact and carbon impact of writing inefficient queries. So I'll give a shout out to our team at Etsy, or the team at Etsy. Their team is doing incredible things with the software development lifecycle, analyst experience, where they're surfacing the energy responsibility down to the individual, and is creating a really interesting cultural shift where everybody's bought in on making sustainability, not just, data center emissions, but the entire, it's a KPI like cost or performance, which is really cool.
No, that's incredibly powerful. And thank you so much for all that color. I think it's very different reading all this in a web article versus hearing it from someone who breathes this day in, day out, and seeing what's top of mind for you. So I'm sure Javier and I, and of course our listeners, are really appreciative of that. One other question I had was around your role in public sector cloud. And I'd read that Google spun off its public sector focused business line away from Google Cloud into an independent division. And I'm just curious, why was Google public sector spun off?
First, a couple of nuances around the structure. It's a subsidiary of Google LLC. So, not technically spun off of Google, but really more taking resources and focusing them into a legal entity that allows us to transact directly with a variety of government customers, because there are certain contracts for which the government needs to have a direct relationship with an entity. And so we need to have the contractual and business mechanisms to do business directly with the government. Whereas in prior years, we were mostly transacting through partners or systems integrators. So it was really important. Responsibility number one was be able to work with our government customers directly. So that was one of the driving forces. Two, we have a long history and tradition of working with the public sector here at Google. From the very first search index and research funding through search appliances, apps for government, over the last 2 decades, we've done a lot. EDU, where you'll see Chromebooks and Chrome in, actually, I think I've heard now the majority of educational K through 12. We've tipped over into 51%-ish roughly in EDU, which is amazing. So a lot of tradition and legacy that's very positive about impact, Google technology impacting public sector broadly, EDU, state, local, and federal. But we needed to focus. We needed to amplify it. And so Google Public Sector was really about bringing together all of the resources across EDU, state and local, federal, as well as business, finance, technical, operations, support, and really saying your sole mission is to focus on the public sector and help our customers digitally transform the government. And sometimes you just have to put the mechanisms in place to do that. And so we've been working on this for a while. And now today, so we announced this in June, and less than 6 months later, we have a fully fledged business, Google Public Sector, its own subsidiary. We have an amazing new CEO, and we have a leadership team that's world class. And we're already starting to see some amazing momentum, especially in the federal government over the last week or so, where our technology is achieving higher levels of certification, regulatory compliance, which is really important to trust in the government. And we're winning and getting share of large potential contracts just yesterday and today with U.S. Department of Defense and others, which we couldn't be more proud to be able to serve customers like that here at Public Sector. So an amazing, we've been working on it for roughly about a year, but in just the last 6 months since we launched it, just incredible momentum.
That's great to hear. And you have built multiple teams at Google, as you were mentioning. So what's your approach for building high-performing teams?
Sure. Number one is understand the primary thing you're trying to accomplish. Because some people call this problem definition, some people call this vision, mission, strategy, whatever lens you want to use. It's really hard and really important to distill the essence of what you're really trying to accomplish when you're building a new team. And in my experience, if you can't explain what you're trying to do in 3 bullet points or less, or, kind of one statement, then you haven't refined it enough to go off and recruit amazing people to join you on that mission, to explain it to other people, to mobilize them, to gain resources, to understand when you're on track or when you're not. A lesson I learned in the military was you're not always going to be told exactly what to do. But we had this thing in the Army called commander's intent. And they're like, listen, when stuff starts happening, the plan goes out the window, right? Because now it's kind of like, playing chess or, in any adversarial, like a generative adversarial network in AI. Once you start doing something, there will be responses and you have to constantly adjust your responses. But if you don't know what your end goal is or what your objective function is, it's really hard to know that you're making progress. But if you know what your objective function is, you know what your desired end state is, you can take a lot of paths to get there. And it allows for the creativity and innovation. So the most important for me has always been, if we accomplish only one thing, what is it? And can I explain it simply and clearly? And then the second most important factor is finding a small group of people to get started with that share the belief in the passion and the mission and can withstand the ambiguity, complexity, and dynamic nature of any early stage thing. And whether I've done it on my own, I've been in a small company other people owned, I've been an investor and seeded other people, I've been in a large company and built out, especially here at Google is the second team I've built out. It's always the same, is that no one can give you the blueprint. And there are a lot of people who have an opinion. Big company, there's just more people that have opinions. In small companies, there's less people, but they have lots of opinions. And being able to stay true to that azimuth that you determined at the beginning and bring in the right, few first people absolutely dictates the success, a year later or 5 years later of the entire endeavor.
Yeah, that's very true. The ability to communicate the mission is very important because based on that, then you can get to understand who gets it and who wants to be part of it and who wants maybe not necessarily, like you mentioned, the same blueprint, but the same objective, right? So I think that's really important, especially, at the beginning when you're really thinking like, how do we do this?
Yeah. One of the things I think about the most is how do I stay open to leveraging the inputs, insights, and creativity of amazing people that I recruit to a team, but also stay true to the original purpose of what we're doing. And as the leader, be willing to hold on to that, because it's a delicate balancing act. Because if you hire the right people, if you bring the right people on your team, they're going to challenge. They're not just going to say yes and put their head down and run forward. They're going to challenge when things should be challenged, and they're going to bring really diverse and interesting perspectives to the table. And so as a leader, probably the biggest challenge, especially in these entrepreneurial activities or in kind of the 0 to 1 stuff, is how do you make sure you're leveraging the talents of these amazing people that you're speaking with and recruiting and balancing that with the need to stay focused on like a mission. And so I think there's a really big difference between a purpose and a strategy. Like the purpose of why would a CTO organization exist or why would public sector organization be needed is different than the strategy to make it successful. And so quite often as the leader, I've had to carry the backpack with all the rocks in it around the purpose, but then the team carries the backpacks and the strategy and how we navigate it. And I have to avoid like bleeding my strong sensibilities of purpose into openness around how we accomplish. And that's really where the creativity comes in, especially when you're building teams. I've always been a big believer of building teams that have the ability to diverge and converge rather than those that are just like, yes, like absolutely, that's exactly the right thing we should do all the time. I get really nervous when things are very quiet or when I hear a lot of yeses.
Yeah. And that idea brings me back to my initial point that this fosters innovation too, right? Because when it's only one people making all the decisions, it's one way of thinking. But if you then listen to everybody, then you get more creativity.
Yeah, it is always the classic conundrum of, how do you build with everyone, for everyone, but also make progress at the rate at which, the market demands. In a lot of ways, it's the essence of leadership is having some sensibility of when, it's time to diverge and when it's time to converge. And having multiple opportunities to do so over the lifespan of very complex projects, like building a CTO organization at Google, especially in a place that already, I could argue that Google is a place where we probably have 50,000 CTOs who are people that are just so technically and technologically savvy that they could be the expert on any given topic. But sometimes it's time to go. And sometimes you have to test. It goes back to one of the foundational principles in the strategy, the execution, which is being customer driven. The reason why we focus on those areas of differentiation I mentioned earlier, data, open infrastructure, security, sustainability, AI, is because that's what our customers are telling us they need. And so one way to guide kind of the decision trade-off or kind of the timing trade-off is keep your antenna really sensitive to the market and customers. And it sounds trite and it sounds like everybody would say that, but it's amazing how easy it is to diverge from that when things get really exciting or you fall in love with a technical problem and then you look up and you realize you're building the wrong thing.
Would love now to pivot and ask you a couple of rapid fire style questions.
Got it. I'm ready.
Okay, awesome. When you interview someone for a role, what's one of the favorite questions you ask?
Teach me something that you're really interested in and you're learning about.
We are all taking notes, by the way, right now. So this is great. Do you have any hidden talents?
I'm a pretty good ice skater.
Nice. What's the best career advice you received?
Try not to over-engineer your career and try to keep an open mind because opportunities present themselves in ways it's impossible to predict.
Why do you love Google?
The people and the mission. Never been a part of anything like it.
What was the best moment you had in WART when you were doing your MBA?
When I found out I was actually going to be able to graduate? No. There was an entrepreneurial set of classes that I took, and the light bulb really went on for me around the power of storytelling, because you have a bunch of really smart people who are coming up with really great ideas for launching companies. It became very obvious to me, both my deficiency in storytelling, but also how those that were able to tell really great stories about the mission of what they were trying to accomplish and how they were trying to accomplish it, and why their teams were the best teams to do it. That storytelling is a game changer. And I've taken that with me throughout my entire career. It's probably one of the reasons why I've been semi-successful after that is just my ability to kind of pull myself out of the weeds and hopefully convey semi-compelling narratives to activate people on something I think is really important.
Amazing. And we asked this question now. It's our final question to you. It doesn't need to be rapid fire or anything, but we're just curious, when you think about the future, what's your boldest, most unique prediction that folks might feel is a moonshot? And we can focus this on cloud computing, but you believe will happen in the next 5 to 10 years.
Sure. Wow. Okay. So as long as no one listens to this in 5 or 10 years to check on me, I feel okay throwing this out there. One thing I've observed is the rapid closing of the gap between being able to produce something like an application or a service that people can use and the ability and knowledge and the coding ability that you need. So I think one of the most profound transformations that's happening in technology is sometimes people call it no code or low code solutions, but today you can drag and drop modules and create data pipelines. You can drag and drop modules and you can create machine learning models. You can go to your favorite SaaS platform and extend it with capabilities that the software provider didn't actually even build in. So looking ahead 5 or 10 years, I think that software and creativity with software is going to be much more accessible and open to a much wider demographic of the planet. And as a result, we're going to see, kind of like we're seeing this week, we're going to see an acceleration of just really amazing technology being created by people who maybe don't have all of the experience or the need to dive deeply into all the computer science that today we still have to roll up our sleeves pretty significantly to create a lot of these capabilities.
That's great. And personally, I took a class on AI and a lot of that focused on how coding is now becoming a lot more accessible. And it's all about the purpose and the mission. And I can't wait for a future where, this access is a lot more democratized. So
Absolutely.
Thank you for that bold prediction. And I personally hope it comes a lot sooner than 5 to 10 years, but we'll see. We'll check up on both of us in 5 to 10 years.
We're working on it. We're working on it.
Amazing. No, thank you so much, Will, for making the time. This was a really great conversation. We learned so much about your career. We learned so much about what's going on in the market and the tech world. So very educational and very inspiring, if I can say so.
Oh, well, that's very nice of you. Thanks, Bandana Javier. It's really a pleasure to be here. And maybe one parting thought is stay open and stay curious. And it's amazing what can happen if you do those two things.
Thank you very much, Will.
Absolutely. Take care.